Thank you very much. I'm Larry Williams. I work with a company which some of you may be familiar with. I think it's a company that's becoming probably increasingly high profile in the NASA and the space world, but I'm not going to assume that everybody is familiar with the company Space Exploration Technologies. And my presentation and my talk today is going to focus a lot on SpaceX, but I really want to present you and talk about ways in which we believe that the private sector can, as was mentioned earlier, work specifically with educators and with NASA to really inspire young people. I know that obviously being educators, you all recognize what often sounds a little bit like a cliche, but it's something that I truly believe, which is the children are our future, and the future of our children is in education. I'm certainly a big believer in that, and having been at SpaceX now for about 8 years, I've seen just on our side of the equation, and I was in the government before, the power of the private sector to inspire, and the power specifically of space and what we're doing at SpaceX to really inspire children. And I've had the opportunity to go out and speak at a number of different schools and interface directly with kids of all different ages. And actually the thing I think that I found personally the most inspiring was going to talk to a group of inner city kids in Washington, D.C. It was a summer program for high school students. And it was a lot of kids that, I could tell from the discussions that I had with them after my short presentation that they didn't have a lot of background in science, technology, engineering, and math. But one thing that does seem to really inspire kids, you probably heard this before, but for some reason, dinosaurs in space. I found that just explaining what we're doing at SpaceX to these children, they were really youngsters and like I said, at high school age, it really did, I find, inspire them, get them interested in the possibilities of working in this industry, in this field. It was something that I think really opened up a lot of minds, especially having somebody like myself presenting who doesn't really have a science, technology, engineering, and math background. I certainly took those classes, but my background, my science background was actually political science, not rocket science. But I've certainly learned a lot on the job. And so I wanted to talk today, give you a little bit more background on SpaceX, but really talk about what I think the private sector can do working in partnership with government, specifically with NASA, to really inspire the workforce of tomorrow. So one of the things at SpaceX that we did early on, for those of you that don't know a lot about the company, it was founded by a successful serial entrepreneur named Elon Musk. He was probably most well known for being the founder of PayPal. And I've been reading, and I'm sure most everybody's aware, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, recently passed away, and there's a biography out about him, which I highly recommend. And one of the things that I think Steve Jobs and actually shares in common with my boss is really setting very ambitious goals. A term that was used in a book you may have read about building companies that last. The concept of setting big, hairy, audacious goals, or BHAGs. And when Elon founded SpaceX, it was really the big, hairy goal that he set was to develop a family of launch vehicles that will ultimately reduce the cost and increase the reliability of access to space by a factor of 10. And we're actually making quite a bit of progress towards that. He's since revised that now. His ultimate goal is to decrease the cost of access to space by a factor of 100. In order to do that, one of the things that we really have to master is reusability, which I'll talk a little bit about, and that's something that we have not yet mastered. That's certainly on our goals, but things are going quite well. This is a cover of Popular Mechanics 20 Bold Ideas from a very recent edition, in which it talks about SpaceX Dragon as being a very bold idea. The rocket itself, which is something that I think gets a lot of focus on in the industry, the rocket itself is just a means to an end. We look at it as just transportation. It's obviously still rocket science, so it's hard to use the word just or simple. But at the end of the day, I sometimes describe SpaceX as we want to be FedEx to space, which means you give us your package, we put it on orbit. And as educators, while there are a lot of kids that are interested in building rockets and a lot of people that are interested in building rockets, at the end of the day, where the science comes in is actually what happens when you get to space, what happens in orbit. And that's something that we are ultimately trying to do. We see SpaceX, what we're doing is lowering the cost of access to space, is an enabler for doing lots of science and opportunities for getting on orbit and doing things that previously were not possible. In terms of SpaceX, again, for those of you that are not so familiar with it, we're growing very quickly. This slide, which I just created today, it says over 1,540 employees, and about the time that I printed it, I got an update that we're now actually over 1,600 employees. I joined the company in 2004, is about the 35th employee, so you can imagine we've been growing very quickly, hiring lots of fresh outs, so I think we're pretty well known now on campuses around, especially with the major engineering schools. Our facilities are based, Hawthorne is basically in Los Angeles, very near LAX airport. And we're changing one thing, which is it's somewhat been conventional wisdom that it's not possible to have cost-effective manufacturing in the United States anymore. And we do all of the manufacturing of the vehicle is done in Hawthorne in the United States. It's 100%. All of the technology is 100% American, and we think that there's that America can do manufacturing. We then take the rockets and we ship them to Central Texas, where we do our propulsion testing and structural and development testing in Central Texas. And then we've launched our Falcon 1 out of the Marshall Islands at something called the Reagan Test Site at the Amalek and the Kwajalein Atoll, the Marshall Islands. We're building up Slick 4 East at Vandenberg at the Air Force Base there. And then we've been launching the Falcon 9, which I'll talk a little bit more about, at Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral. That's on the Air Force side. By the way, I encourage you, if there are questions along the way, I'm very much prefer interactive presentations, so there's no reason to wait till the end. Feel free to just shoot your hand up, and I'll try and make sure I keep an eye out for questions as we go. In terms of the products and what we're doing at SpaceX, and again, think of SpaceX as representative of the industry. We do think we're a unique company, but there are other companies out there doing similar things, and we encourage NASA certainly to partner with all of them. But we started out developing the Falcon 1, which is on the left, and that was sort of a Pathfinder test launch vehicle. The engine was developed at SpaceX. All the structures, avionics were developed at SpaceX. We then moved on to the Falcon 9, which is an EELB class launch vehicle. Think of it equivalent to a Delta IV medium, Atlas V class, and it's called the Falcon 9 instead of the Falcon 2, even though it's a second generation, because we have 9 of the Merlin 1 engines, which is the main engine on the Falcon 1 on the back end of the Falcon 9. That's flown twice successfully. And then the Dragon spacecraft, which is the reusable spacecraft that has been developed for bringing cargo to the International Space Station now that the space shuttle is retired, and it will be evolved to carrying crew, astronauts to the International Space Station. We're currently under contract to work on that technology. And in addition, I'm going to talk quite a bit today about something that's a little bit less well known called Dragon Lab, which is the same spacecraft but modified to have a longer on-orbit life, so you can do lots of science missions and lots of opportunities for flight opportunities in low Earth orbit that actually don't go to the International Space Station, which is a little bit of a bottleneck. So the Falcon 9, I mentioned just a little bit about the design. It's flight proven now, 100% success on both of our early test flights. The next test flight is scheduled for early next year, and it's scheduled to dock with the space station, bring cargo to the International Space Station. We'll be the first private company to do that. A little bit more, there's some details here on the launch vehicle, but since I assume most of you all are more interested in what you can do on space than about the launch vehicle, I'm going to keep most of the focus about that today and make sure we have some time for some questions. But we did design it to be the most simple rocket designed to date. We certainly have used a lot of technologies from other launch vehicles that we've innovated and utilized. A quote I liked in the Steve Jobs biography, who actually quotes Picasso as being, saying that good artists copy and great artists steal. Well, we did, I would say, in some ways, steal some of the innovations that were done before and then improved upon them. In terms of the design of the launch vehicle, there's probably more in terms of operations of the way we do our flight operations with the Soyuz spacecraft than current American launch vehicles. but we certainly leveraged a lot of technology developed at NASA, and wouldn't be here today without being able to leverage all of the flight vehicles and the experience that came before ours. In terms of some of the technical innovations and achievements today, we're certainly very proud of. In the far right-hand corner, we were recently named the award winner for Aviation's Week. Popular Science's Aviation Award for 2011. But we are most proud probably of the last bullet point on here, that last year we became the first private venture to return a spacecraft from low Earth orbit. In that flight, we launched on the Falcon 9, put the Dragon spacecraft into orbit. We did two trips around the Earth, re-entered and recovered the spacecraft off the coast of California. A number of other technical innovations and achievements there, specifically listed things that have to do with the Merlin engine and the flight vehicle, which was all developed by SpaceX. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about keys to success, since we really wanted to talk. I think today you're interested in talking quite a bit about what we're doing at SpaceX and what companies can do and what organizations can do. This doesn't just apply to the private sector in terms of the keys to success. Certainly people, we think, is probably the number one goal. And as we look out in terms of motivating kids, and we think it's very important to start early, and certainly we see NASA is in the forefront of leading that effort of educating and inspiring kids in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and math. And we certainly benefit from that, and we're hoping that the work we're doing, just like in the early days of the Apollo, will also inspire kids to move into these fields. I recently did read a quote which I think will also have an impact, that now the highest paid salaries for newly minted bachelors coming out of college is in engineering. I might have a nephew actually who just is going to be graduating from Harvey Mudd, an engineering school in California, and he's coming out in his senior year and has already been given a job at $70,000 a year for starting salary, which definitely beats anything that any opportunities that I had at that age, and for quite some time after. We do focus a lot on design. We think the simplicity is very important in terms of keeping the design and making sure that it's a reliable launch vehicle, using two stages, which is the minimum stages that have been proven to get to low Earth orbit. At the bottom left-hand corner there, you can see the growth. I know it's difficult to read, but that's the growth from 2002, which has obviously been quite rapid. You know now we're over 1,600 employees. The blue section there is in California, and then the next largest swath is in Texas, and then the third after that is in Florida. I'm going to talk some more about what I mentioned at the start of the talk about Dragon Lab, and a little bit about Dragon and how this has evolved. So if we can see here, move to the next slide. So Dragon, I just came up with this today, FQ, fast frequent flights, to provide flight opportunities both to the International Space Station, used for NASA CRS. That acronym stands for NASA Commercial Resupply Services, and both NASA Crew as well as the Dragon Lab missions. This is some language that was recently included as part of the NASA authorization bill, and then also modified slightly in the America Competes Act, talking about the opportunities for commercial orbital platforms. And the idea here is to ultimately provide at least one flight opportunity per state. So NASA would administer a program that would give every state, one university in each state, the opportunity to fly on an annual basis. One of the things that we found in talking to a lot of universities and going to things like the SmallSat conferences, that a lot of universities and even high school programs are developing spacecraft, but they never get an opportunity to fly. So you have a lot of payloads that kids work and spend a lot of time on, but they never get the opportunity to fly. We think this is going to help facilitate that. The three launch vehicles there, just as a point of reference, you've got the Boeing spacecraft on the left, that's called the CST-100, the Dragon spacecraft in the middle, and then the Space Dev's Dream is also Sierra Nevada. Space Dev is the subsidiary, the Dream Chaser on the right. And we think all of these vehicles that are being developed as part of the commercial Crew program can provide opportunities, a lot more flight opportunities for hardware, which is ultimately when we think inspires kids today, is the ability to actually work on hardware, build hardware, and ideally have that hardware, space hardware, fly. In terms of the Dragon spacecraft, just a little bit about how this has evolved. There was originally the NASA COTS program, and that stands for Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program. That was developed to develop a way to get cargo to the space station after the space shuttle was retired. That then has evolved into, after we demonstrate that capability, we have a contract for 12 flights to the International Space Station as part of the Commercial Resupply Services contract. And then, in addition to that, we plan to develop something we call Dragon Lab, which is a free-flying recoverable platform. So instead of having the limiting factor, the gating factor of the amount of space in the operations facility about going to the International Space Station, we can remove that, a lot of the headaches associated with that and the limitations associated with that, and actually provide free-flying opportunities, which should provide a lot more opportunities for student payloads to get into space. This is some more technical details. A lot of this is on our website, so I'm not going to go into great detail on the actual Dragon capabilities, but there are a lot of different opportunities here, and it's for a relatively low amount of total cost of anywhere between 90 to 125 million. That's for the entire facility. Now, you divide that up, it can actually carry hundreds of different payloads, so the overall cost per payload is something that is dramatically lower than it is today. And with something like the pressurized capsule, the nice thing about the Dragon is, instead of having a separate satellite bus that provides all the power and a lot of the capabilities that are currently you have to pay for as part of a satellite bus, you can have shared infrastructure. So a lot of this capability is actually provided by the Dragon in an enclosed environment. And then the trunk section, which is the lower section there, is opportunities for free-flying satellites to launch. So in our last mission, we actually launched 6 different CubeSat satellites out of the back of the trunk. Just so you have a sense of how all this would work in terms of the concept of operations, obviously there would be the launch. We then have separation of the Dragon, on-orbit operations for up to 2 years. We then drop off the trunk on the way back in. We re-enter, descend and landing, and then recover. And these Dragon capsules are actually designed to be reused. So ultimately, we think the cost to orbit is going to be, as I mentioned, we believe we will reach our ultimate goal of at least a factor of 10 lower than anything that's out there. In terms of the sort of possibilities, it opens up a lot of opportunities for things like microgravity research, in-space research, technology demonstration, which is certainly a big, important challenge for NASA mission managers, and as I mentioned, sort of serves as an orbital spacecraft bus. Some of the other applications here, to do sample and witness plates, deployment of spacecraft, like I mentioned, using Peapod, small CubeSats, Peapod, ESPA-class satellites, or even larger than that, and then have the Dragon serve as the actual spacecraft bus. And I also mentioned that the plan is to ultimately fly crew. This is certainly something that I think captivates a lot of children's imagination. A lot of people still have not woken up to the realization that with the retirement of the space shuttle, America no longer has the ability to put humans into orbit. We have to rely on the Russians' Soyuz to do that. SpaceX believes we will be the next American provider of crew transportation services, bringing astronauts into orbit. And we've already begun working on our launch escape system as part of what's called CCDEV-2, Commercial Crew Development 2 program. It's a $75 million contract, technically Space Act agreement, not a contract, with NASA. And we believe we can start delivering crew in as little as 3 years from now. In terms of the path forward, there are a lot of opportunities going forward. I talked a little bit in the video about Falcon Heavy, which is in the upper left-hand corner. We hope to be docking with the International Space Station, planning to dock with the International Space Station the first part of next year. In the bottom right-hand corner, it's what looks to be a somewhat short stage with legs. It's something that we're calling Grasshopper. We're doing a demonstration self-funded by SpaceX to ultimately allow our first stage of the Falcon 9 to land on land as opposed to land in the ocean, and with the ultimate goal of recoverability, reusability, and that's what we believe will help allow us to move ultimately down to a factor of 100 in different costs. And then there's a nice enticing picture there of the Dragon on Mars. We actually have a group at Ames that's looking at using the Dragon for early Pathfinder missions, not of crew, but of just doing cargo missions using effectively commercial off-the-shelf hardware. Things like the heat shield, we believe, can withstand actually a Mars re-entry. And it's a challenging time for the space industry. In closing, I just want to say that one of the things that we hope we're doing at SpaceX is inspiring the future. We think the future in space is very bright. It's obviously, we're going through a transition period now with the retirement of the space shuttle. A lot of the sort of common mass media is, I find when I talk to people that aren't in the space industry, people are getting the impression that NASA is getting out of the human getting out of the human space flight business. We try and do everything we can to dispel that myth. We see SpaceX as an enabler of space opportunities. NASA is our most important customer. We're there to enable NASA scientists and NASA exploration. We have we believe we've established an excellent partnership through the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program that's run out of JSC. And we think there's a lot of opportunities for space to continue to inspire kids to enter science, technology, engineering, and math, and overall to further their education. And we hope we can play some small part in supporting your all's efforts to do that. So with that, I'll be happy to take as many questions as we have time for. In the back right, I see one. Sorry, I picked the one that's furthest away from you.
Very good presentation. I'm thrilled to see SpaceX here. I was wondering who would be the best point of contact for universities to speak with the many opportunities that you have to offer in engaging in getting projects to fly on some of the aircraft that you presented.
I appreciate you asking that question. We definitely are interested in having those conversations. I'm going to give you 2 email addresses. I'm going to give you one of the individual who's probably going to be the primary interface, and then I'll give you mine in case there's any problem.
Great.
The first one is Dustin Dowd, D-U-S-T-I-N, Dustin.D-O-U-D @spacex.com. And mine is simply L-A-R-R-Y, Larry @spacex.com.
Great, thank you.
And ultimately what we're hoping to do, and I understand NASA is getting ready and getting close to issuing a request for information on this commercial orbital platforms program, which we hope NASA will implement in the near future and Congress will fund now that it's been authorized, which will give universities a chance in every state to run its own competition to provide flight opportunities on our Dragon spacecraft. In addition to that, we are, under the Dragon Lab model, we're working with multiple different partners to be an integrator. So ultimately, we probably will use a middleman entity, either a NASA entity or a company. For example, there's a company called Andrews Space in Washington State that is serving as an integrator of the payload, because ultimately it could be hundreds and even over 1,000 different payloads all integrated together that fly up, and we will probably have intermediaries that do that. But in the meantime, feel free to have them contact us, and we'll be happy to direct them to a few of those possibilities of the intermediaries about how best to sort of work with us.
Hi, thank you for joining us and for your presentation. I know you are not the education person at SpaceX, but I was wondering if you can elaborate more on your education portfolio. Tell us a little bit more about your commitment. And the last 2 days, we've heard a lot about inclusion and diversity. And if you can speak to how you're ensuring that you have inclusion and diversity in that education portfolio.
Absolutely, and I appreciate your recognition that I'm probably not the best person to speak on those subjects, but I do know enough to probably get myself into trouble, so I'll try. In terms of overall on education, certainly we're trying to do things that we can directly with our recruiting. We have a very aggressive intern program and recruiting program, so we have I just know from my own sort of two eyes that we had over 100 interns last summer. We have a very ambitious intern program, and we work with most of the major schools, major engineering schools, and we end up at SpaceX, obviously you see we've had rapid growth. We end up being able to recruit the senior people that have been around, that are either are somewhat more financially secure and have accomplished a lot in their jobs, maybe at larger aerospace companies or within the government, and they're ready for a new challenge. We seem to be able to recruit those people sort of that come at the VP and the senior director level. And then we have a very good experience, very fortunate in being able to recruit some of, we think, the best newly minted engineers coming out of school. And where we've had some more challenge probably is in the middle level, where you have people in the middle of their career. They're a little bit more risk averse because maybe of their personal situation. They're in an established company that seems to be more secure, although I'm not sure that's always the case, maybe than it would be at SpaceX. And so we do a lot of education in that regard. And then there's a woman in our marketing group named Emily Shanklin, who I know is putting together a more ambitious education program. We also just recently hired a senior vice president for marketing and communications that's going to be a big part of his outreach program. And we really want to try and help build up the brand name and sort of convince kids again that space is a cool place to be. Because at the end of the day, that seems to be one of the biggest challenges that we've had to overcome, that space has become boring and it's not as exciting as it used to be. For better or for worse, one of the things that we've seen is with Wall Street and the challenges they've had, I think it's now seen as a little bit less glamorous or less fun or easy to go to Wall Street, because we found actually a lot of the brightest kids, certainly maybe probably 5 years ago when I first joined SpaceX, we would want somebody, and they were trying to decide, do I go to Wall Street and make just what they thought was gazillions of dollars, or go to work at a space company. And I think it's got a little bit easier to attract some of those types. And I'm not even talking about like finance types to come work at SpaceX Finance, because that's a very small number of people, but a lot of those are just the brightest kids, and even coming out of engineering that think they can go to Wall Street or start their own .com company. And we find probably our biggest recruiting challenge of young engineers, especially on the computer science and the software side, is companies like Google, Facebook, and things like that. But we're certainly doing our best. We think we're holding our own, and we're really building, we think, a next generation of space employees that will do that. Last thing, I think you asked about the diversity. We actually have a very diverse workforce. So I would say surprisingly so compared to the average. One of the reasons I think that is the case is because we actually do so much manufacturing that we end up with probably a more diverse workforce than the larger prime contractor that tends to sub a lot of that work out. If you walk around our factory, which people have, they tend to comment on the amount of diversity that we have. It is pretty unusual. I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, but I'd be happy if anybody's interested in providing them.